Hi folks, welcome to episode 87 of the Epochs of the Load Seeders. I am of course joined by Bo, and today we're going to be doing the Battle of Kursk Part 2, the actual battle, the largest battle in human history.
Yeah, on a couple of different metrics as well.
Really?
Yeah,
Which
yeah.
ones?
Biggest aerial combats that ever took place. Obviously, biggest tank engagement. That's what everyone's here for.
Yeah.
I imagine that's what everyone really loves.
And presumably largest infantry as well.
Yeah. It's like it's up there.
Right.
Like well over 500,000 men each. Well
crazy.
over that. Well over that. The Germans had like 600,000 in one of their pincer movements.
Really?
So yeah, it's just gigantic. It's sort of off most other scales of any other battles, really. Which is what plays into that thing I said in episode 1 of this, part 1 of this, where that Stalingrad isn't decisive. It's a turning point for sure. It's decisive for the German Sixth Army and von Paulus, but it's not decisive for the whole of World War II or the Eastern Front. Kursk is, though.
Right.
Kursk really is decisive.
Right.
The Germans never have any large offensive actions on the Eastern Front again. There are small ones, even in 1944 and stuff, but they're small.
Right.
They're sort of quite easily contained by the Russians and things. All right, so I've got a quote here from von Clausewitz, which is a great one. He said of Russia in the early 19th century, quote, Russia is not a country that can be conquered or occupied. Such a country can be conquered only by its own weakness and internal strife. Which
Probably true.
is probably true, yeah.
Yeah.
I feel like if it was the whole world versus Russia, it might be different, but...
Yeah, I mean, maybe in the future we'll be proven wrong about that, but certainly in the 19th century that was definitely true.
And in the first half of the 20th century.
Well,
I think nukes kind of changed the calculations entirely.
Yeah, but in the time that he was writing, that was definitely true.
Yeah. One of the things with the various wars and conflicts with Russia today, people just seem to not talk about Russia's giant nuclear arsenal. Like as if America's going to go, or NATO's going to go to war with Russia. It's like, sorry, are you forgetting they've got...
Out of sight, out of mind, Bo.
They've got 10,000 nukes or something stupid.
We won't think about it. Just won't think about it.
Anyways, we're not talking about that today.
We'll send men over to Ukraine. It won't be a problem.
Yeah, they could create a nuclear winter in the flash, in the blink of an eye. Anyway.
Yep.
Anyway, talk about World War II, summer of 1943. Want to talk a little bit about the commanders on both sides before we actually get stuck into the action. So on the Russian side, most famously, Zhukov. Have you seen the film The Death of Stalin?
I haven't.
Oh, it's really good.
Right.
Zhukov's in it, played by Jason Isaacs. It's a comedy film, really.
Right.
Like dark comedy. But it's played really well by him in the sense that he's like very earthy.
Right.
They play him with a northern accent. And it's funny anyway. But yeah, so Zhukov was one of the few people that survived Stalin. Not only survived
one of the few people who survived Stalin. Fair way of describing it.
Obviously, there was loads of people that survived. He had a whole government.
Yeah.
But of the sort of original, or people that were heroes in World War II, people that, like all the old Bolsheviks, for example, pretty much all gone. Pretty much all of them. He was
Can't trust any of them.
Right, yeah. If he was a great hero in World War II, then that was going to be an issue for you. But Zhukov was sort of so famous and so beloved by the end of World War II that even Stalin couldn't really afford, it seems, to sort of get rid of him or replace him.
But I mean, he doubtless had the sort of reputation as the man who saved Russia.
He did, exactly.
Obviously.
Yeah. If you ever see pictures, I'll put a picture up. The amount of medals and things on his chest, it's stupid. It's really stupid looking. But
good for him.
Yeah, right, yeah. No, good for him. And he was loyal to Stalin, so Stalin obviously never thought that he was actually going to try and usurp his position or anything. But yeah, he actually outlived Stalin. And he was thought of as, I think I mentioned in the last one, that he was sort of genuinely a great strategist.
Yeah, that's all I've ever heard about Zhukov.
Right, yeah. Because a lot of the Russian top command, the Stavka, that's what they were called, their sort of high command, not all of them have got reputations for being brilliant minds, but Zhukov was. But he was, needless to say, I suppose, quite ruthless. If you didn't do your job well, you were certainly replaced, if not worse. He didn't take kindly to anyone shirking their responsibilities or anything remotely like that, kind of obviously.
Good for him, yeah.
He was thought of as a bit of an expert in armoured warfare and tanks and things, which is, what you need. He was
if you're going to have the largest tank battle in history, it's handy to have an expert in armoured fighting with you.
Yeah. Because it's not always the case, like in some of the Allied high commands, you'd have people right near the top that were old infantrymen.
Yeah.
Or even old cavalrymen.
Fighting the last war.
Right, yeah, sometimes, yeah, right, yeah. Whereas, people like a lot of the Germans, like Manstein, or in the Americans, like Patton was a tank lover. But Zhukov was at Leningrad and at Stalingrad.
Right.
Issuing extreme orders, like not one step back. I mean, that came directly from Stalin, but, trying to make sure those orders were carried out. So ruthless, but capable. Second most important guy under him was Rokossovsky. He was the guy I mentioned who had been sort of purged but not killed. He'd been in prison for a few years and they'd smashed his face up a bit, smashed his teeth out.
Oh, that guy, yeah.
And they'd also subjected him to sort of mock executions and things. It's sort of as bad as you can get without killing you.
Yeah, it's pretty awful.
Yeah. But he also is thought of as very, very, very capable.
Oh, that's lucky.
Right, yeah. Well, that's why they sort of let him out.
Sorry for all the torture and disfigurement. Do you mind leading the armies? I just can't imagine it. Do you mind getting bent?
Right, yeah. How about no?
Yeah. But yeah, anyway.
Well, that would have been certainly death, wouldn't it, and for your family. But he's sort of an old hand. He'd been one of the few that the Soviets, had sent to Spain just before World War II for the Spanish Civil War. So he was, thought of as one of their best guys. Very much.
Didn't they lose the Spanish Civil War?
The commies, yeah. Franco, the nationalists, won it. Yeah. But Stalin and the commies gave it a good go.
Okay.
They did give it the old college try.
Okay, fair enough.
But Rokossovsky was also at Stalingrad.
Yeah.
So again, if anyone doesn't know, and I doubt they've got many viewers who doesn't know, but Stalingrad was obviously, a real meat grinder, one of the most horrific sieges there ever was.
Yeah.
So to come through that, to say you're hardened or battle hardened is a bit of an understatement. So Rokossovsky was important on the northern front of the Kursk salient. Because there's more than one battle with the Kursk. We call it the Battle of Kursk, but there's actually loads of different battles, smaller battles that go on. And there's certainly a northern front and a southern front, and they're like whole different army groups and things. So for the Russians on the north, Rokossovsky is sort of the guy. On the south, they had Nikolai Vatutin. Again, thought of as not just competent, but people say he was their genius, really.
Right.
He was their genius. Hitler thought of Manstein as like his genius. Stalin and Zhukov thought of this Vatutin as their sort of genius, really.
Right, okay.
And he was the one that got killed in 1944 by Ukrainian nationalists.
Oh.
He's that guy. He was sort of in control of the southern front. And what the Russians had, which the Germans didn't have, like another whole army in reserve. Well, I'll talk all about how the Germans had no real reserves. They had some, but not like an army group.
You can see by this point the Germans have spent a lot of men.
The Kursk in 1943 is their last massive throw of the dice. They know it. And so, they just can't afford to have many divisions or a whole army group or anything, a whole army or anything like that, whole army corps, rather, in reserve. But the Russians do. And their guy there is Konev, sort of behind the lines, and they do have to use him. So within the Kursk bulge, the Kursk salient, they've got, depending on how you measure, sort of 4 or 5 whole armies there, and the German.
It's crazy.
The numbers,
it's
right?
Crazy.
It's mad.
Yeah.
Again, like over 1 million men all in all, 1.3 million. Could argue up to 2 million, and so the German plan is to try and encircle 4 or 5 armies.
Which is a bold plan.
Yeah, well, it's nothing if not bold, right? So
give them credit for being ambitious, I suppose.
Yeah, they got no real choice. The old cliche, the old adage, but a German general said it, that they've got a wolf by the ears here. Broadly speaking, the Eastern Front of World War II They're holding a wolf by the ears. You can't let it go. You just can't. You've got to keep going. There's no choice now. You can only imagine the sort of despair or horror in the mind of Hitler and the senior Germans, or all Germans, once they realise that the Red Army's coming. They're going to murder and rape their way across at least all of East Germany into Central Germany, which they did. It's going to happen.
And that's the thing. It could be like a month away. I'd have been like, okay, we're going to go. We're leaving.
It's one of those things where you think, say you lived in Prussia, and the war hasn't really touched you all that much yet. But it's pretty much inevitable that the Soviet armies are going to come through where you live, and like, sort of the horror that's going to bring. But it's nowhere near. It's nowhere in sight. Still, you're just living your normal life as you always have, and everything looks and seems normal. You can't even really imagine what's coming, but you know it's coming.
You surely got to be like, we'll just sell anything that we can sell, and we'll leave. We'll just walk. Be better than staying here and getting bayoneted by a bunch of angry Russians.
Yeah. Well, I've heard it said that in 1945, one of the biggest sort of exodus of people is people from East Germany just going west.
Can't blame them.
No. Surrendering to and being captured by the Allies.
Yeah, much more preferable.
By the Yankees. Yeah. They'll probably even just give you chocolate and stuff.
Yeah. Here's a cigarette.
Oh, cigarettes and chocolate rather than rape and a bayonet. Yeah. Not much of a choice, is it, really?
That's different worlds, isn't it, between the East and West fronts?
Yeah. Okay, so on the German side, they had sort of in overall command for things. There was General Zietzler, and there was also a Rundstedt. Talked about Rundstedt a fair bit in the Operation Market Garden series I did, because he, like a few others, like Model, right towards the end of the war, were sent to the west, fought on the west for a while. But during summer 44, they're on the east, and Rundstedt's sort of in overall command. But again, you've got the northern and the southern portions of the Kursk salient. So on the north, which is Army Group Centre, it's under von Kluge, one of the very most senior, one of the most famous generals. Under him is Model, the 9th Army, under Model, with the monocle. As I mentioned, he was actually at Market Garden in occupied Holland in the west, later in the war, in 44.
If we were going to imagine a stereotypical early 20th century German, he'd look like this guy.
He'd look a bit like Model, right? Yeah, he's like a caricature almost, in all sorts of ways. And he was in charge of the 9th Army,
right,
which was on the northern skirt of it. And on the southern side, there's the 4th Army, and it's Hoth is in control of that, really, Hermann Hoth, and also Werner Kempf. They had sort of two battle groups, the 4th Army and Kempf's army. Between them, that southern portion of the Kursk salient is the largest command Germany ever had. They mustered the biggest sort of single command there ever.
And how many people was that?
It was like 600,000 guys.
Right. Under one command.
Yeah.
Can't have been easy to make all of this work. Like
right.
The logistics of just getting 600,000 guys to do what you want them to do. I can't even imagine how difficult that was.
Yeah. Where we were doing a thing about the end of World War I recently, I was reading all sorts of things about that. And some of the biggest battles in that were right at the end in 1918. Because in World War I, the battles just kept getting bigger and bigger and bigger. And the ones in 1918 were the biggest of all, arguably. And they've been described as battles on that scale and this scale, which is even bigger, if anything. It's sort of the most complicated sort of human choreography ever done. It is the most complicated thing. Yeah. It's astounding that they sort of kind of work at all. But also, having said that, they do also quite often break down into a type of chaos, like a semi-organised chaos.
But I can't imagine that it's anything other than. you know, if you've got explosions and bullets flying all over the place, people screaming and dying, and some guy's like, right, I've got an order for you. It's like, oh, that's very interesting. You know, it's very fascinating. Why don't you leave that on my desk? And I'll get to that as soon as I'm not being shot at, okay? You know, I just can't even imagine. Can't even imagine it.
Yeah,
Anyway.
well, that's how army structures work, is that you've got sort of, you know, senior top brass, divisional level generals and senior colonels and things. Then it devolves down to sort of captains and majors and stuff. But the real reality nearly always is it's your non-commissioned officers, sergeants and like lieutenants and things. And you really need them to know what they're doing. You need them to know what their little cog is in this giant machine.
Yeah.
And so regardless of if and when they get split up from any sort of senior command post, they still know what they're supposed to be doing.
Yeah.
So
it's always been in warfare, though, isn't it? You know, it's the non-commissioned officers that are just the most important.
Right, yeah. It's really on them most of the time.
Because they're the ones directly involved in the danger.
Yeah, most of the time. Sort of your more senior sergeants. It's all on them quite a lot of the time, quite quickly. And also, well, one of the things that made the German army of World War II sort of so good or so efficient, good's not really the right word, but so efficient at their job, was that they'd had this idea ever since the interwar years of breeding into every man that not only do you know your job, but you should know the job of your immediate superior. So should he die or just be replaced for whatever reason, you should be able to step into his shoes in the blink of an eye and know what you're supposed to do, to know that role. And it comes from, it's interesting actually, it comes from in the interwar years, even before Hitler and the Nazis got into power, because of the Treaty of Versailles, the Germans were only allowed a very, very small army, like 100,000 guys, I think, wasn't it? Yeah. And so what they did is they just made the selection process extremely rigorous. To be an officer in the German army in that point, they only picked the very, 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 very best of the best. Weeded out anyone that had any problems whatsoever. And so you had a colonel, not a rank, colonel seed, of the best, just the best of the best senior officers, and that trickled down. And so when the Nazis got in and just started breaking the rules of the Treaty of Versailles and started just increasing the numbers of the army, they were starting from this launch pad of sort of greatness in a way.
They had a fantastic framework in which to operate.
Right. So all the guys of the pre-1933 German army were sort of great at their jobs, and so they trained everyone else to be quite great. The opposite of the Russians, where it's just a peasant who may or may not even have a rifle.
And the army's been purged because Stalin's insecure about it, and so the officers are terrible, and so everyone's terrible, and yeah.
I think it's absolutely safe to say the officer class of the Soviets and the Germans was just night and day different.
The complete opposite.
Yeah, pretty much the complete opposite. Throw into that the Russians they had political commissars throughout their armies as well, so you very much know your role and stay where you are and keep your mouth shut. And it's not your job to necessarily know the responsibilities of the guy above you.
Well, you might be getting ideas above your station.
Right, yeah, right. So they were very sort of structured very, very differently. The ethos, that was the word I was searching for a moment ago. The ethos is very, very different. But nevertheless, the Soviet army was just so gigantic. I mean, 4.5 million men. Something like 4.5 million men.
Well, quantity has a quality all its own, doesn't it?
Right, absolutely.
As Stalin said.
The Germans also had Erich von Manstein on the southern front. Would have been, and he, as I mentioned, Hitler thought he was sort of a real genius. He again, within a few moments, he sort of could take in the strategic and tactical situation and kind of make the right call nearly always.
That's good.
Yeah, not many people are able to do that, kind of obviously.
Well, this is the characteristic of what we call, a great general, isn't it? That, we've covered plenty of them, and they, like you say, they've got the eye; they can just see it.
So there's loads of generals all throughout history, and you get to become a very, very senior general, and you still haven't got that.
Yeah, right? Yeah, there are loads.
So Another thing to mention about Modal, who was on the Northern Front, is that he was later given the an epithet or a nickname of the Fireman, because during the last stages of World War II, Germany were just reacting.
Yeah.
And Hitler would send him all over the place to put out fires.
Right.
So to very quickly, literally get to a senior command, be told in a few minutes what the situation was, issue a load of orders, and then leave again. And those orders get the German army out of a real pickle.
Well, that's lucky for them, isn't it?
And he just did that again and again and again.
Yeah.
Ultimately, he got surrounded by the Americans and shot himself. So Modal was never actually at Nuremberg or anything.
Right.
Okay, Hoth. Just a quick word on Hoth. Great sort of tank commander again. He'd been promoted quite quickly. He wasn't one of these guys who was a senior general before World War II or anything. He was one of those guys who was sort of during the war was sort of picked out as being great. Bit like Zietzler. Zietzler was at Dieppe as a sort of fairly junior general. And they were like, oh, that was brilliant what you just did there. I mean, superb. Let's make you one of the top guys, like top 12 guys in the whole Wehrmacht. That's the story of Hoth a bit. And he comes, I'm going to talk about him a little bit in more detail when we get into the actual fighting, because I think he was particularly savvy. He seemed to make particularly clever decisions, I think. But again, obviously, the way history since the war has sort of made out that all Wehrmacht commanders, whether they were dyed-in-the-wool Nazis or not, they're all just like pure evil. What's that? What's that cartoon thing with the red? Not cartoon thing, but the film they made with the guy that's got a skeleton face, a red skeleton.
Red
face.
Skull.
Red Skull. Yeah.
Right.
That like anyone that was in the Wehrmacht is as evil as that.
Yeah.
It's like well. There were degrees of it, to be fair, right?
I mean, well, the actual like Nazis in like the SS and things like this, like these are the people who are genuine, ideologically committed villains. Because I mean, I can see the argument for a lot of these guys being like, well, I'm German, and Germany is under attack.
Right.
You know, I'm not saying they're good or bad or anything like that. I'm saying that really, there's no point making these sort of judgments this far after the events.
Yeah.
I just don't care, you know, let's assume they're all evil Nazis. Okay.
Yeah.
The other side were all evil communists. I mean,
right.
You know, but this is the thing, you know, were the other side all committed communists? I don't know. I don't care. You know, there's no point making moral judgments about them this far down.
Fair enough. Yeah. Now you mentioned the SS there, so yeah, just quickly to say on that, there were three SS armored divisions there. The three SS armored divisions. There's the Liebenstadt, and the SS division Das Reich, which is Hitler's own SS division, and then there was the Totenkampf, which is the Death's Head division, the famous Death's Head one, which is an old Prussian thing. The SS didn't make that up out of nowhere. It's a very old Prussian thing.
It's all the Mitchell and Webb thing. It's like, are we the baddies? It's like, what, because you've got a skull on your... God, that's not new. You know, like... And the whole thing from Mitchell and Webb is like, it's funny, obviously, but it's just like, you understand that all of these people are what we would traditionally call warriors, right? Their profession is killing people. They are all merchants of death. That's the only function that they have. It's not surprising that some of it becomes a part of their ornamentation.
Yeah.
It's not in any way surprising. But anyway.
Yeah, what, did you want their insignia to be like a feather duster or something?
Exactly,
like, what do you think?
Exactly.
Right, yeah.
It's such a childlike, it's such a sort of early 2000s middle class, upper middle class view of the world, right? It's like, well, it wasn't, you know, why weren't they, you know, love hearts and rainbows? It's like, because they literally kill people. That's their job.
And the Death's Head insignia is very old. It's like 19th or even older, 19th century or even older. There's pictures of like the Kaiser and his son from World War I with wearing Death's Head insignias.
But like the idea of like, you know, skull insignias, skeletons and things like that, you know, the Reapers and stuff like that. This must go back centuries and centuries. Yeah. You know, it wasn't made up by the Germans and the Nazis, probably not even the Germans.
Big part of being an army is giving the impression that you're killers. That's what it's kind of.
I mean,
big
the Saudi
it's kind of
flag has a
obvious,
saber on it, for Christ's sake.
Right.
You know, like, sorry, it's just throughout history, the warriors were proud of being warriors. They killed people.
Yeah, it's what they're here to do. That's their whole
I
job.
realise that the sort of Love Actually crowd have a problem with that. It's just, you know, life wasn't always an early 2000s skit. Anyway.
On the Russian side, to mention, they did use quite a lot of penal battalions, which is to say all sorts of criminals, whether political or otherwise. The Russians, yeah.
I bet they did.
And so they were quite often thrown in first.
I bet they were.
Used as quite literally cannon fodder and things. If there's some sort of effectively a suicidal mission, throw the penal battalions in. Or if you were if you're being punished, if your regiment or something, your division is being punished for not doing well enough earlier in the war or something, you were thrown in with the penal battalions and sort of. Yeah.
I can't imagine what the attrition rate on those was like.
Huge, obviously, depending on what you were asked to do, but
it's going to be huge.
Like in the ancient Roman times, quite often they would do. If you'd disappointed senior commanders, then your whole division isn't the right word, but like your whole legion or something is then effectively punished by given almost suicidal missions.
Yeah.
Anyway, the Russians, the Soviets would do that sort of thing with their penal battalions. But I do have to mention it because, again, just the scale of that is they use that hugely, massively. I don't know if you know much about...
I stole a loaf of bread in Vladivostok. Well, now you're getting thrown into the German machine guns on the other side of the world. It's like brilliant.
Yeah. Gulag in Siberia or penal battalion on the Eastern Front?
Give me the Gulag.
Oh, yeah, I'll take the Gulag, if it's all the same to you. Okay, right. So let's finally get into the actual the final thing. So they didn't start until early July. So July the 5th it kicks off. Again, with actions this big, you can debate what exact day it started, but they usually say the 5th. And that's very late in the summer. That's the latest the Germans ever did an offensive, and I've talked all about it in the last one, so I won't go over it again. Why that was? They were pushing it back. Hitler pushed it back loads of times.
Well, because they needed to get the men together.
Yeah, and mainly to get lots of the newest Panther and Tiger tanks into the field, which they rushed too much. So anyway, there was basically a calm before the storm, but like it was 3 months long, really.
God, but that was bad in and of itself. You could feel the tension building. What's happening? Well, millions of men are appearing on our side, and even more millions of men are appearing on their side. And what are we doing? We're sitting here and waiting for hell.
Yeah. It's funny you should call it hell because although, particularly on the Russian side, lots of different accounts for people that survived say things like, I know it's a cliche that war gets described as hell, but this was hell. This was worse than hell. This really was like hell.
It's just the worst environment to ever imagine.
Yeah.
I mean, reading a bunch of the accounts from World War One was bad. You know, the guys are in the craters and they're dying and there's blood everywhere, but you can't go out and save them because then you get shot and then there's more death and it's like, oh God, this is awful. You know, like how much worse could this get? But this must have been like that, you know, on steroids. This must have been so much worse.
To watch the full video, please become a premium member at lotuseaters.com.